Hello and welcome back. Obviously, we've already previously met. We're now into your final year, which is congratulations on making it this far. Uh, I'm going to be giving you a rundown of the course, of what we're going to be covering this semester. Obviously, we've met before, but just as a rundown, in case there is anyone that's new, my name is Alex. I'm an app developer, um, released a bunch of games. I help with Cambridge Game Devs. Obviously, things are a bit quiet at the moment. Um, and yeah, I make custom controllers and do kind of unusual installation based stuff. Um, this is just like a quick showcase of some of the kind of stuff in mobile I've done over the last um, few years, not accounting for the last year of development. Um, I'll be covering a lot of that in one of the upcoming presentations. But yeah, it's just kind of like a little showcase of the various stuff that I've done. Yeah, so let's move on from that. So, as I kind of highlighted before, it's really, really good that you've made it this far. Just 24 weeks of kind of academia until you're all wrapped up. Well done making it through at least the last 2 years of university, particularly in the current situation. I certainly wouldn't want to have done any of my university degree during a pandemic. Um, so we already have like a tremendous amount of respect for you all for kind of making it this far. Um, and hopefully, as part of that, you've managed to make some games along the way. But having said that, um, you're also on the home stretch, so there is just 24 weeks to go until like your academic careers are finished. So there's three questions that I want you to kind of to take some time to think about, which is like how many games have you actually built during this time period, um, and within that number, how many have you finished? Um, how many game jams have you participated in? Like, have you either attended them or have you kind of done them online? And then on top of that, like, do you have any connections with the industry? Be that through having attended networking events or like through reaching out to people online. Um, yeah, keep those three questions in mind. It's really important that you have an answer for those, and that that answer meets the minimum standard at least for what graduates are expected to have, um, you know, in a modern climate. Because realistically, like this is your competition up upon graduating, and technically now, across the UK and beyond, there'll be thousands of students graduating from university this next coming year. Um, you know, there's the people that have graduated in the last few years and are still looking for work, particularly in this climate. You've got industry veterans who are have maybe finished contracts or have been let go from studios in the current situation who are looking for work. And then beyond the UK, you've obviously got you know people from abroad who are incredibly talented. There's lots of universities. If any of you have attended Brains Eden previously, you'll know that there's a lot of fantastic universities out there, and expertise in general. Irrespective of university as well. And in particular, with things becoming more digital and online, um, you're going to be competing with those people more and more. And then on top of that, you've got the kind of like eternal march of every student year after you is also going to be kind of moving forward for every year that you go from having graduated. Um, I deal with students at primary school level that are learning how to code. So like 10 years from now, they're going to be like catching up with you and me. And then on top of that is me. I've I am still technically in the industry right now. If you went for the UK Games Fund last year, I will have been competing with you. If there's exhibiting space, I'll be competing with you for that. Um, so yeah, like that's your competition. In terms of prospects for indies, these are some of the kind of problems that are kind of emerging at the moment or have been prominent for a number of years. In general, there's like a downward trend in terms of like funding availability. There's some schemes and stuff to kind of help stimulate, things like the UK Games Fund, for example. But, a lot of publishers are closing their doors in terms of like working with small starting up companies. Um, and the kind of more unsettling trend is that like the interest in indies through like search results is like in decline and is continuing to be in decline because it's been nearly like a decade, I think, since Indie Game the movie came out, or at least a good number of years. Um, so like the power that the indie wields is in decline. Um, yeah, and obviously as part of that as well, you get a lot of developers that receive a lot of flack, particularly marginalized ones from audiences. Um, the wider industry itself, um, the actual pricing of games has been nearly over a decade in stagnation. Um, and the way that they've filled the gap for that, similar to things with like free to play mobile, um, you've filled in the shortfall by having exploitative practices like loot boxes and microtransactions and all that stuff. Um, in particularly more recently, there's been all these like abuse scandals that have been coming out, which has been absolutely dreadful. In particular things like Ubisoft. Um, yeah, like that's probably the most recent one. Um, yeah, and then more broadly, you've had things like crunch, which is just utilized across the board in a lot of studios. Um, yeah, and these are kind of matter of fact things at the moment. Um, and in particular for graduate prospects, it's kind of an industry. It's not even a secret, but like common knowledge that a lot of graduates get put into QA roles to kind of chuck them into the grinder, which is not optimal. Um, so obviously, with that in mind, like hoop jumping is just not going to cut it for this course. I understand that that is really difficult to say at this time. Where even for me, I found it that like just functioning at this point, with everything that's happening, is a difficult in itself. But for your degree, if you just do what's required of you for the course, um, it's not going to be enough. Um, and like the thing to keep in mind is if you like you've it might not feel like it, but you've got like a tremendous amount of time right now, to make whatever you want and to like utilize this time to kind of set the path for your career going forwards. You know, get on with making that thing that you've always wanted to make. You're at a point now where you've had a couple of years to build up your skills, and now you've got time to actually deliver on that. This is important to act on because come graduation, 24 weeks are gonna fly. Like it's it's gonna be over real quick. And when that happens, as you'll have probably experienced already, as with what happened in February, um, there's kind of like an atomization that occurs when you leave university, where everyone kind of goes back to their respective, villages and towns and stuff like that, and moves back home. Um, and that can be quite difficult to adjust to. Um, so like getting doing like active planning now and like trying to prevent that atomization is really really important. um, Another thing is that like most of you, or like a decent chunk of you, will have gone from like you'll have had like a clean vector from like primary school to university to graduation, where like you will have consistently been in education from a very young age. And going from that to having no structured routine of like me telling you what to do, um, is a really difficult adjustment. Um, and this is stuff that needs to be prepared for. And then on top of that as well, you've got like the additional pressures of um, the cost of living, particularly when you're not a student anymore. And then some kind of other elements as part of it. You know, there's the fact that you are putting yourselves in debt right now, and that is only like as it is a problem, but it's uh, you know you need to make sure that that investment is worth the amount of money that you're putting down. Like, use this time to like your advantage. Don't let it be a waste. And in this time, you absolutely have the support of us to try and like help you in any way you can, particularly right now. We're going to try and accommodate in any way we can to kind of make sure that you leave this course prepared for what's out there. And one other thing to keep in mind that a lot of people don't talk about, which I think is really important, is that when you graduate, there's like when you're at university, there's like an expectation that you're kind of people are kind of happy with you doing that, and are like, oh yeah, of course you want to go to university and do this thing, you do you. When you graduate, there's a lot more expectation for you to actually deliver on something. So why don't you have a job? um, when are you going to find work? Like, it's much harder to pursue this career when there's money needing to be made, and a lot more stigma that not enough people really talk about. So taking advantage of this time right now is crucial. I can't emphasize that enough. So this is kind of where that neatly connects to where this module comes in. Um, so like this is, I would say from here on out, if you've not been already, you should be considering every assignment that you do an opportunity for a portfolio piece. This in particular is a really good one for portfolio, because it's a compact, easy to kind of share and access portfolio piece. Um, the problem with things like team project is that like you're doing this as part of a collective, and your contribution isn't necessarily as clean cut as something like this. Um, Obviously, in a normal setting, you could take this mobile game along to an event and you could show it to people there, just kind of, pull it out on your phone and just be like, hey, look at this cool game I made. Obviously, in the current circumstance, it's a lot harder, but if you can get your game published online, on the Google Play Store or App Store, that is a really useful thing, and much lower barrier to entry to get it on those platforms. And crucially, like when you leave, having something to tether you to industry is really, really important. Having like a project to keep you engaged with the industry, and having a mobile app is a good way to do that. So we've obviously like I've worked with you all before, so like you have a rough idea of what my expectations are, but just to kind of recap, like for this current setting, like um, I really want you to turn up to these sessions, because you know I'm gonna have very limited time to kind of to interface with you all. I obviously would much prefer to be doing this face to face, but so that kind of increases the importance of turning up to these sessions, um, and as part of that, like I want to try and encourage you, whilst we will have those sessions to talk and engage with one another, um, I want you all to take initiative. So going back to what I was talking about before with like getting used to not having a routine set by someone else, um, I want this module to be like a decent portion of it to be like independent learning. So figuring out what you want to build and then like finding the resources online and how to do it. I will be providing you with some resources, but I take this module as a means of like learning how to to find out information for yourself. Um, in terms of deliverables, obviously I'm not going to expect you to be showing a game on week one, but like after kind of the third or fourth week, when we have these like sessions, yeah, if you can try and have like something to show week on week. I can understand that it might slip a couple of weeks if you're having to balance other stuff up, particularly with this only being like a portion of a portion of another module. But it really helps if I can kind of get a sense of what you're working on, particularly with it being remote. If I can keep up with what you're doing, then I can advise. If I don't see anything for weeks and weeks, I can't tell you whether you're on track or not, or kind of nudge you in the right direction. This is a really important one. If you're behind, or you're just stuck, or there's just something that's gone wrong, and you've just, let's say you're at week 4 and you haven't done anything, please get in touch with me sooner rather than later. This applies, in general. Like if there's problems, please get in touch sooner rather than later. There's very little that I can do other, when it comes to the last few weeks, if you're like well behind, other than kind of, try and kind of help you salvage a pass or something like that. And I don't want that to, once again, going back to what I was talking about before, like this isn't what we should be aiming for. You need to be getting like a solid portfolio piece from this. And we can work together to make this, to make an awesome portfolio piece happen. And then finally, like I really don't want the scenario of people having work being lost. There's so many means of backing up your work in the modern era that it shouldn't really be an excuse. Yeah, okay. So let's kind of dig into what we're going to be covering. So what is a hyper casual game? I assume most of you will know, but just for those of you that might be uninitiated, it's basically like a kind of a minimalist game with kind of replayable mechanics, usually for like a casual audience, often one-handed, so you can kind of just play it like whilst you're on the tube or something like that. Yeah, and quite high engagement. Yeah, built to almost be kind of like almost not even passive, but just like very easy access in terms of gameplay. And how that translates into the deliverables for this module is I want you to build a hyper casual game. One of the reasons for this is because that kind of sets the scope of what I'm wanting. Just setting a mobile game, you could end up making something like, I don't know, the Banner Saga, or something very, very high scope. I want something small, focused, and polished. And what, because of the current situation, we're going to be getting you to produce the game to run in an Android emulation software. If you can, just quickly, if you are wanting to kind of get through this quicker, I should have mentioned it at the start. This is kind of just going forwards in general, good to know. Push the speed setting, go on settings and set the speed to 0.125 or 0.5. 1.5. It'll kind of get you through it a lot quicker. I appreciate that I might be speaking quite slow, but yeah, it'll just mean you can get through the tutorial content quicker. So yeah, essentially get like a version of it running in Android Studio. If you do have access to an Android device, that's great, but it's not required for this module. But essentially deliver that, having like a version of the game in Unity that's optimized and kind of scaling and displaying correctly on a device or a simulated device. Yeah, and kind of the surrounding UI and UX. I'll kind of go into it a little bit more in just a moment. The deadline is similar to the other modules. I believe there's like a fixed module date this year, which is the 14th of December at 2 p.m. And make note here of the Unity version, which is listed here. I will need that to be fixed. Like if you submit in the wrong version, I can't mark it. Because as with the Unreal project last year, I had to download, I think it was something like 3 different versions of Unreal for the various people that had like incorrectly submitted in the project. So please make sure that you use that right version. I don't want to have to fail anyone. So kind of delving deeper into the rubric, you can see on the right hand side that it's kind of standardized, the same as what you have with Ian's module on AI. And then as part of that, I'm going to give you a specific brief to kind of go along with that. All this documentation can be found on Canvas, but I'll kind of give a bit of a rundown through. So, at the bare minimum, like the things that I expect from a technical side of things is I don't want the device to be able to rotate and have like the UI, a portrait game end up in landscape and vice versa. It should be fixed. You want to be aiming for a very low file size in terms of project. So your APK you'll want to be aiming for around 15 megabytes of 20 is like an absolute cap. I would prefer it if you kept to 15 megabytes because realistically, an employer, if they're going to download this, as with a customer, you're going to want them to be able to get it quick. The game itself needs to be kind of catered to the current mobile market, and by that I mean, as I kind of alluded to before, it shouldn't be you just building a stats heavy strategy game. Like you need to take some time to like research the market, find a genre or like a subgenre within hyper casual games and kind of cater something to that. And the other major element to kind of factor in is I want you to build a 2D game. There will be, some people that either have much better skill in 3D than 2D. And when I ran the module last year, there were students that I spoke to who wanted to work in 3D rather than 2D. I'm open to that. You will need to kind of provide me with enough evidence that you can actually deliver on this, because realistically, you might not feel it, feel it or think it, but 3D takes significantly longer to, get to a similar level of polish as 2D. And just kind of like exponentially creates more problems. So, if you are interested in doing a 3D game, you're going to need to talk to me about it. And then in terms of like the actual content of the game, it needs to have like a decent user interface. So like, having like a pause menu, a main menu, maybe a game over screen, stuff like that. Kind of having like well-designed UI in there. A UX, so a kind of user experience that means that the player isn't just dropped in with all the mechanics. Like you've got to kind of ease them into it. So having that kind of implemented in a sophisticated way, having kind of good controls that are kind of accessible for people to play, but still you can use an emulator to control it. Just to clarify, I will have access to devices to be able to play test it, but to make sure that everyone can deliver something for the module, we've got to do it in an emulator, because there are people that don't have access to these devices. If you go beyond and kind of do some implementation and monetization, like getting ads implemented, that's a great little addition to kind of show that you're kind of factoring in how you're going to monetize your product, because realistically, as I'll go over in the presentation, like free to play is kind of like one of the kind of standard models on mobile. And then kind of actually refining this small product you've made up to an industry standard polish. And as you can see on the right hand side, there's each of these like categories. These kind of line up to what's being discussed in these sections. In terms of a polished user experience, this kind of encapsulates all these things. Scope management is obviously if you've abided to actually building a project, that fits a hyper casual audience, and you've scoped it to what I've asked you to do, which is a game that you could build feasibly in a week. Brief compliance is what it says on the tin. And the one that I want you to pay attention to is project maintainability. So this is worth 10 marks. So this is 25% of your grade is just in if you have well commented code, and then your project has a decent file structure and it's like, it is maintained in a industry standard format, rather than just kind of in disarray. These are 10 marks that are just so easy to get if you just maintain your project in a decent manner. Just some kind of thoughts to kind of end on is, even though things are kind of a bit bleak at the moment, keep in mind that you do have access to like resources that would usually cost you thousands to access outside of industry. You've got access to a reciprocative labor market, which means that like you can work with people from audio department. You can work with people, and like you can both get portfolio pieces out of this by working together. Like this is something that is really, really useful. Like I made a lot of my contacts for working with people in industry through collaborating with others, like musicians and sound designers. Even though we're in a lockdown, but you know what I mean, like a pandemic, you are still in like a major tech hub, and you have all these studios on your doorstep, and you can still reach out to them. And that, as a matter of fact, there is a lot of stuff that's been happening, that's like online now that you can access, which would have previously been like gated off events. There's been like conferences and stuff that I've attended that would otherwise be like paid, multi-hundred of pound events that they've just made open to the public for free. So there is still a lot of opportunities, and as I'll be mentioning, in the mobile tech presentation on my career in games, like you can build games right now without like a need for a profit motive. So you don't have to worry about the commercial viability. Obviously, that kind of clashes with what we're talking about for this module. But like, this is what I mean in terms of like your time outside of like what you're meant to be doing as the bare minimum for the course. Like, if you've got an idea that you've always wanted to make, like now is the time to do it. You've got more time than you should technically ever have. Obviously there's people with certain circumstances where that's not the case, but for the decent majority of people on this course, that should be the case. And like whilst the markets are saturated and things are difficult from to like you can publish stuff on these platforms. Like I remember when pre-Steam Greenlight, like there was no way to get on Steam. So like whilst you're getting less downloads, like you can actually get on these platforms. And then the kind of only final point I'll really make on this front is that like when I went to university, like there was only a really small number of people of the course that actually did anything beyond what was required of us for the course. And like they are the last few that are actually still in industry. And even of them, like many of them have like pivoted into other jobs or just left. So like realistically, like you need to be able to kind of engage beyond what is just the bare minimum for the course, if you want to kind of have a long-term kind of prospect for work in industry. um, and keep in mind, like, when you graduate, that's not like the magical transformation point of when you become a developer. Like, you've arguably, like, when you chose this path, you've been a developer this period of time. So, like, making sure that you're, seeking out these kind of online events that are happening at the moment, and taking part in game jams, like with what I talked about at the beginning, and using the remaining time you have here to do stuff, for your portfolio, is really, really important. This is a bit of a contentious one because obviously, like, the current situation makes it near impossible. But there is still stuff happening, remotely, that you can kind of get involved in. Obviously, when I was teaching you before, I encouraged you to turn up to the socials. I didn't realize that, like, we were going to be unable to run them, which is a shame. It is. Um, so yeah, the only thing I would potentially recommend, which I think I mentioned previously, it's become even more of a hellscape, but Twitter is very, very useful, particularly now that everything's digital, for kind of making contacts and kind of seeking out work. That and LinkedIn. I'm less fussed about LinkedIn. I'm sure some of the other lecturers will tell you otherwise. Yeah. And then other than that, I'd just say to, like, it's from a self-care perspective, it's really important to look after your physical and mental health at this point. Not just with COVID, but, like, this industry, like, messes people up. I've got quite a few friends that have, like, chronic issues, as a result of working in this industry, and, like, making sure that you're, like, looking after yourself now, at the start of your careers, rather than waiting till, like, you've got something wrong with you. I found out last year that I got, like, high blood pressure now, so I've had to, like, make a bunch of major changes to accommodate for that. So I would, like, really encourage you to try and get some, like, good routines in place. It'll serve you really well again when you graduate and these routines start to kind of evaporate. Yeah. One in particular I found really useful is getting a water jug. Just means that you can, like, hop up at any point and have, like, a really refreshing glass of, like, fridge cooled water. It's really lame, but it really has made a huge difference to how much how hydrated I am, rather than relying on things like energy drinks or stuff like that. Yeah, and then other than that, try to do stuff outside of games. It sounds a bit weird in that way, but, like, I found that, like, a lot of the games industry is kind of, like, insular and kind of fart sniffing. It's like people making the same games, like games that have been inspired by games that have been inspired by games, like interacting with other mediums, collaborating with other people, is really important. Like, I am at the moment doing a projection, like I'm doing a project with a group in a town outside of Cambridge where we're going to be projecting interactive installations onto, like, the sides of buildings, in relation to, like, climate change. And yeah, it's I'm going to be working with, like, artists and musicians and writers and all sorts of stuff, like, who aren't necessarily in games. So do try and get involved with people outside of our industry, and the other way around, bring people from outside of games into games, because we need more of that. So in terms of what I want you to do for next week, it should be pretty straightforward. This, going back to what we talked about in terms of scope for the module, I want you to kind of think up 3 concepts for hyper casual games. If you haven't already, do some research to gauge what hyper casual game is and, like, what to expect from it, and kind of come up with 3 concepts for, like, for 3 ideas for games with, like, no more than 3 inputs on screen, Preferably aim for lower than that, but you know, I'll obviously be interested to hear what you come up with. Um, Something that can be explained very concisely in like an elevator style pitch. And the scope for this is really important. I want you to think of a game that you could feasibly design in a week. And the reason I'm setting you that is because, you know, I don't want you to design a game that is finished for week 12. I want you to have a game that could be done for week 6 or even let's say week 6. And with that, you could then refine it and iterate on it rather than it just being the game just delivered in the nick of time. That was weird. Sorry. This is a weird noise that this came through. Oh, is the email. Sorry. Uh, yeah. And then finally, keep Android in mind for the platform. So, you know, when you're designing this, think about for for mobile and in particular for designing on an Android device. Something that might be useful is to have a notebook. I find it really, really useful to have one of those just for kind of documenting stuff and clearing my head of ideas to kind of make some new space for other concepts. But uh, you know, do some like kind of little illustrations and doodles and come back to me with some ideas and I can kind of help you figure out which is the most feasible in the time that you have. Cool. Thank you so much for your patience in terms of going through this. Obviously, that was a lot to digest. You know, it's great to be kind of working with you all again. And look forward to hearing what your concepts are going to be.